Today's podcast is on keys to athletic longevity. So, themes to this show or themes of this show are not just about being faster, stronger, enjoying training more as we get older, but longevity throughout a season, throughout a 4-year career, as you transition from post-collegiate to just training. My goal is, regardless of who you train or what you're training for or what your age, that the ideas here can be of use to you. And yes, I'm 42 now, so a lot of these methods are things that I've learned through the past few decades and a lot of stuff in the past few years even, as well as in working with masters track athletes who are regularly an inspiration for me, people who are setting records, national, world records in their 40s, 50s, 60s. To me, one of the most impressive groups to train if we talk about outputs throughout life is a really valuable group to work with. So a lot of these things are certainly ideas that will help you to sustain abilities over time. But again, regardless of who you work with or what age you are, I think that these are things that can also just help any progression of training. So without further ado there, let's get into the keys to longevity. I have 10 of them. And the first one is to always be looping back into a mastery of strength or resistance with your body weight. And so this is something that whether you are a younger athlete, an older athlete, I find that you do run into bottlenecks where if everything is output, everything is force, everything is, can I put more weight on the bar? Eventually that will run its course. And it is a great help to many, many athletes, if not all, honestly, to improve their forcefulness and using barbells and dumbbells and things that make forcefulness easy and efficient to get. It's really helpful, but the base of all that is mastery and ability with one's body weight. So, well, what is that? You could be push-ups and pull-ups and crunches and things. We think about that type of activity, but digging further than even that, it's physical education. It's being able to climb a rope and do monkey bars and do cartwheels, for example. So yes, we have the body weight versions of strength or expressions of strength. And I'm a big believer that you should be able to do good push-ups and pull-ups and body weight strength exercises before you really dig into barbell work. Not only will you have a more healthy and robust experience with the barbell work, but I believe the peak is higher when you have good physical body weight underlying abilities. But then even beyond that, and especially this is over time, is I believe, and how we often look at fitness as well, is when you go to the gym and you work on your muscles and your appearance and also your strength. And there's a lot of great things that happen there. Confidence, you get a great feeling with a muscular pump and just seeing changes in your body. It's one of those things that money cannot buy, and working on your body as a tool is very important. However, the skill is a really big deal. The body weight skills, and I'll talk about like a cartwheel, for example, something that it's more than just one ability. It's one of the things that makes us human is the ability to take all these strengths and mobility options of joints and coordinate it all into one pattern. And so for me, body weight and body weight abilities are the thing that we should regularly be coming back to. And yes, I think it's great to have strength pushes over time, or strength as a consistent tool in your tool belt. But if that runs ahead or too far ahead of your ability to, let's just say, do things you could do when you were a kid, I would say, yeah, you're going to run into problems. I don't want to treat it like, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to be in trouble. We can do a lot of routes and adventures in fitness and physical performance and training, but at the end of the day, I do find that a very robust form that I enjoy, if we look at it as a tree and you have the trunk and those are all your main strengths and abilities, and then you have the branches, which are all the expressions of what you do. Body weight is the roots in many ways. It's all those basic mainline strength activities. You could also put isometric holds in there, wall sits and iso lunges and hanging for time and all those things. So it's the roots in many ways. But it's also the branches. It's a strong part of the branches. It's once we have basic abilities and we really consolidate it into more power, then it becomes the expression of what we do. It's, well, how can you use your body in all these ways? And even when we watch things like superhero movies, yes, the superhero is built in this very, it's a caricature of extreme proportions, huge quads and calves and things. And it's extreme, but it's also a superhero is also skilled. You would rarely see a superhero who wins because they were only strong and had a certain strength, ability, or brute force. There's always high skill components behind it and mastery of one's body weight. And that's another thing I like to look at as well is turn of the century strongmen. And a lot of them also had really cool physical body weight abilities like hand balancing or acrobatics and things like that. Some of the lighter weight individuals, I think it's Otto Arco is one that comes to mind. And that went hand in hand in so many ways versus only looking at things in more this raw output, just expanding not only the body weight strength and maintaining body weight strength capabilities, but also maintaining some of the more, you could say, complex body weight skill outcomes. And so just with that to clarify, I'll say, yes, like a cartwheel is more complex. For me, it's things like some breakdance moves or spinal extensibility. You could think like doing the worm in breakdance, but there's more remedial versions of that. But just the ability to extend and flex your spine and have control over that is something that we can easily lose. And to me, I saw a video once, it was two men in their 60s in Brazil, and they were still doing all these breakdance moves. And they just had this joy and exuberance like they were children. And I've heard it said you're only as old, in some ways at least, you're as old as your spine is. And so I think that goes within that level of body weight mastery. Again, both the fundamental skills and then all the expressions we can use with our body weight, and then just always coming back to that. So yes, that exists in the long term, I believe, but also even within a simple training year, starting a training year, even if it's with younger athletes with much more body weight outcomes and abilities, or younger athletes where it should be mostly body weight competencies and not rushing to weights, and then maintaining those over time. And so that body weight piece is a very important part of that equation. Touching on max strength, that leads to the second point, which is to learn the art of doing more with less. And so there are so many athletes, again, who they have these basic skills and abilities, and then it's like pouring gas on a fire, the stimulus of heavy strength work. But for me, a thing that has been very helpful, a concept, is to always be able to do more with less. So if we just look at things as the most pure polarity of, okay, how can I get the maximal stimulation? Well, for lifting, it's just put more weight on the bar and then just keep doing it. And then you could turn your full squat into like a hex bar deadlift to put more weight on and get more stimulation. You could theoretically get like a quarter squat and max the load. And there's ways you can just keep driving the weight. But the problem is at some point there's this kind of curve, if you will. And at some point on that curve, the adaptations you're getting, they stop just being this pure neuromuscular power. And it starts becoming, well, how hard can the body compress itself to squeeze itself and just push that weight up? And that starts to, at that point, become more specific to just having and managing heavy loads. And the ability to do that is certainly part of a total system. And some people may want more of that in their program, but I do think a heuristic at the end of the day that's helpful even for those athletes. And you could think in maybe the more off-season parts of their year or in downtimes. And I'm going to talk about seasonality as one of the points. But it's to do more with less. And so, for example, very simply, you could say, well, instead of a double leg squat, do a single leg squat because you're not going to be able to load it up as much. And that's one simple way of thinking about it. Or instead of doing a regular bench press, what about 1.5 push-ups or slow tempo push-ups with a weight to be able to elicit a similar response? So that's largely what I'm talking about, is the ability to creatively find ways to get the same or close to the same muscular stimulation, but with a lighter weight. And so some of my favorite ways to do that for me, and this is where I've gone, I'm not saying, I think there's a time and place where we do want to push our limits and see what we can do. But for me, where a lot of stuff has landed over a period of time has been, instead of, for example, bilateral squats or hex bar deadlifts, where there's a very heavy outcome, doing things like a staggered stance squat. And one of the favorite tools I like for that is actually a hammer strength machine. Shout out Hammer Strength, by the way, sponsor of this show. absolutely love my squat machine that I use pretty regularly from them. That's been a really powerful way for me to do more with less because I'll have weight on the lever arms and I have this staggered stance, and it basically delivers almost everything to the legs. I don't want to say none to the back because I think you should have a strong back, a functional and capable back. But I can get a lot more stimulus out of a lot less total load in those situations. You could do the same thing, for example, with like a Zercher squat. You have a Zercher hold on a barbell, and you could use 2/3 or half of a heavy partial squat load, do a staggered stance squat or a split stance squat, and get a very, very powerful stimulation very directly to the muscles of the legs and the leg movers. And then you could do something similar for the upper body and upper half. And what I've done for things like upper body work, well, one is rock climbing for the upper body. Instead of like heavy pull-ups and lat pull-downs, I tend to let that take care of a lot of my pulling power and forearm development and grip development, things like that. But then even for upper body, I tend to do a lot more with using things like ab carts and doing push-ups and combinations with leg tucks, or doing push-ups with things like a neural grip where there is a balance component. And so it's not quite as heavy of a load per se, but it's really, really challenging. And it helps me to maintain a large proportion of my muscle mass. And if I wanted to squeak it out a little more, I would throw heavier weights in the mix. But for the sake of just steadier gains over time, finding some of those ways to keep the gains rolling without quite the intensity of the stimulation has been really helpful. Another way too, and I really like sandbags. I'll mention that again, but even doing things like a sandbag press lying on your back, or even a vertical press, or finding different ways to lift and press a sandbag, you get a very powerful stimulus with a little bit less weight because there's just an awkwardness to it. It's like a puzzle. You have to find the way to lift this thing. And just that itself, it's going to recruit a lot of muscle fibers, different patterns. So finding that method can be really helpful. I also think back to some time I spent with Rocky Snyder, who's a personal trainer out of California. I spent a little time with him before I moved out east here. But one of his big things was finding ways to get a ton out of single leg patterning. And he would do a lot of biofeedback, like flexibility tests, pre and post those exercises to see which one was really dialing in the most. So it became more efficient over time. And I do think as we go through our training journey, to find those things that help us to feel good, to feel powerful, to feel like we finish a set, we have this snap and freshness in our system. And a lot of times, well, sometimes that is the heaviest weight. That's a very globally stimulating thing to your nervous system. But then there's also that local art to the actual movement and movement quality itself. So finding some of those pieces that can be helpful there, I think are really good in the training journey. I'll just say another example too, because I think that, it's like, okay, I got a squat example, I got a pushing example, and a pulling with like rock climbing things. But even with things like Olympic lifts, I really enjoy, instead of like a standard clean from the floor, doing like a block clean or a block split clean with a little bit lighter weight. It's done very quickly, and then I'll superset it with plyometrics and exercises like that. And if I want to get that really high intensity effort, I can make that more efficient by just doing an isometric even. Not that you have to split everything up like that. And of course, you can get to heavy sets, but there's always ways to find a really efficient way, or a way to do more with less with what you're doing. Finally, I'll just close this by saying, like, it's not an absolute. Like, and I think we can sometimes get in trouble with when our rules become too absolute. And if we're always thinking, okay, I always have to have the lightest weight, and I always have to do more with less, there is that time occasionally to push the gas pedal down. And how much you do that simply depends on where you are in your training journey. If you're in that kind of peak, that 18 to 25-year-old area, and you could even spread that out even a few years beyond, you can push the gas pedal down harder more often. But if you're on that older side, for me, 40-year-old bracket, I push that gas pedal down a lot less. And if I'm going to get power outputs, I tend to get those from the sprints and the jumps and the plyometrics and the throws, and really feed off those. Those things are a little bit more ergonomic for the body and the body's design as well. And even going back to the body weight piece. So where you are, if you think of it as a dial, and how often you think about how often should I turn this dial max up versus how often should I attempt to do more with less? And it just depends a lot on where you are in that place in your athletic journey. Moving forward, and very related, a lot of these kind of link into each other in many ways, is not just doing things for only the sake of output. And this is true whether you are a high-performing 22-year-old track and field athlete, or you're a 50-year-old just trying to do some things that are fast and explosive and enjoy the athletic process. I think this exists in different shades for both areas and beyond, not just those two archetypes. So to do things for just the sake of doing it, and here's an example. Let's just talk speed training, speed and agility. Imagine a world where on one hand, this is like a dystopia in many senses, is everything you do from a speed agility perspective, every single thing, like you aren't even playing games. You're just going, let's just say for 2 months, and every single thing is measured. So you're running an agility course, timed, boom. What was your time? You're doing sprints, fly sprints, every single thing measured, datafied, if that's a word, and all the numbers are given back to you every single repetition. Okay. And honestly, for a small period of time, yes, there's definite benefit to that. Absolutely. Those give you things that sport cannot. But let's look on the other side completely. And you never measure anything. You never measure how fast you go, how high you jump, how far you threw the thing. It's only speed that happens in the course of sport. And so you just, whatever sprint, however fast you got running in sport, or even let's just say, hey, just go sprint. We're not going to time it. Just try to be fast and hope it feels good, stuff like that. And obviously, the perfect world is somewhere in the middle of those things where we have some timed and measured outputs, where we have that database piece to latch onto. And others, we have just do the thing in the sport where you're just chasing somebody down. You're just doing agility to follow someone to perceive and react on the field. But here's the thing is, to me, the home base, if we want to look at like what's your home base and what's your complement, is the home base is the movement you find in sport. It's chasing, it's racing, it's cutting, it's being agile on the field, it's trying to gun someone down from outfield. Like I think about like Bo Jackson throwing, a rocket to fire someone out at stealing or trying to get home. Those are the home base, because when we do things in sport in tandem with our environment and the richness of our environment, that actually brings out more of our ultimate innate abilities. And it also helps like the timing, like all the little timing pieces, the balance of the body, mind in ourselves and our environment tends to be a lot more, it's just more balanced out. And even the judgment and back loops and how we think of ourselves. It's not like when we're in sport and maybe we missed a play, like you missed a cut, like you tried to follow someone, you missed a certain move or a cut to react to them. You're not thinking, oh, I was too slow on that. I should have moved my foot and ran faster, and the GPS or the timer, I wish it was faster. You think, oh, I missed the play, and you just get yourself to the next play and try to catch up. You aren't running through judgment or feedback cycles either. But when we measure everything, you can, like if you do several sprints, let's say you do 6 by 30 meter sprints, and you're running these sprints and one's fast, one's slow, you're constantly thinking, okay, well, this is this time. Maybe I'll try this a little bit with my arms next time. Maybe I'll think about this in my start and the rhythm of my start next time. And again, that's not like, those are good things to consider, certainly. But I find that if we get too much on that ruminating track where everything is get the output, it can trend in just a rough direction over a long period of time. I find that I like the idea of almost being surprised by your outputs and abilities. For example, if you played football for a season and you did a lot of like fast routes, or even a sport like if you did soccer and there was a lot of like long rectangular field that really incentivized max racing and chasing within the sport itself, I think a lot of athletes would really surprise themselves. They come back and they time sprints later, maybe it's track and field or whatever. You're going to find a big boost a lot of times because you actually turned off the part that had to time everything and you just instinctively competed and ran. And so the ability to gamify and to shut off the timing need brain for temporarily, at least a good portion of the training, I think is really important. And especially too, once athletes get older and you start to move out of that window where, okay, you're probably not going to set a jump or a sprint or a throw personal best or even lift, get further down the line. Well, what are you training for now? How do you win the workout? And I always ask myself this question, whether I'm training younger athletes, writing programs for older ones, and training myself. how will we win the workout today? How do we create this sense of a challenge, an appropriate challenge, and how do we win? How do we move past the challenge into where we felt success and then we can seal in that success? And of course, if success to you is I have to jump the highest and run the fastest, then there comes a point where it has to become more in the moment. I think games, even think things like you can chase doing pool noodle tag, just even basic racing, agility where you're mirroring, take a cut, and then race to a line, tennis ball work, or things that you're chasing a thrown object, and all the ways you can manipulate that. Those are ways just to make it instinctive and fun and in the moment. And as we move forward, I think we have to really consider how we create stimulus in our training environment. And of course, things like track and field, if you're a track athlete or coach, could the whole practice just be people chasing without time and chasing each other with pool noodles? Honestly, every now and then you probably could. But I think those are situations where maybe that becomes more the warm up. Maybe you warm up with pool noodle based chasing or racing games if you feel like you need to inject that energy into the environment to note how that will happen. Even myself, one thing I really enjoyed, and I saw this emerging as I was a track coach in my 20s, is in the fall, we had our speed and power days on other days, our tempo days, and Wednesday was a game day in the fall. And we played a lot of times ultimate frisbee. The athletes where I coached at Wilmington College were not big frisbee players. I partially chose that game so I could just throw bombs to the sprinters and have them chase it down to try to grab it in the end zone. But I started to realize at some point, I would look at the quality and intention and intensity of them sprinting to catch a frisbee. And even if it wasn't on the right training day, even if we were going to come back the next day and do like faster quality work, mixing in some agility, some jogging, and then a long haul to catch a frisbee, I actually found that to have a really beneficial effect, even if we were formally training speed the next day. And I started to realize that you could cultivate intention with games on off days to get that done. So that's how I got it done. And once we got in season, we obviously weren't really doing that as much anymore. I think you can do shades of it. I will say this is kind of funny. I don't want to get too far on tangents of stories, but being at a D3 school, Wilmington, a lot of the kids there loved intramural basketball during indoor track season. You started to get the sense that this was like their Super Bowl. Like, oh yeah, like intramural, like you would go to the YMCA and it would be like a bigger deal to them in some ways than like whatever the next indoor track meet was. And you would think that, oh, they're wearing themselves out playing intramural basketball and they're not going to have gas for the track meet. I saw kids a few days after the intramural game they played jumping very high and very far and being very explosive. And I think basketball, especially if you're not just killing yourself up and down the court or like there's not a lot of extra conditioning in the mix and it's just one game, I noticed that people did not fall off. If anything, some of them almost got a boost or did get a boost from that play in the middle of the week. And I noticed this with high jump as well. And I've talked about this. Other coaches have talked about this as athletes, jumpers especially. I think there's pieces for sprinters or other athletes too, as they play basketball in the winter and then they start track season and they start great. I even saw someone who won a national championship a few weeks after rolling off the basketball court when indoor was done, and then progressively got worse once he just focused on track, or more likely was just focusing on track. And yeah, it's going to be different for everyone. It depends on what you're coaching, your system, and all that. But I always found that letting basketball players at least shoot around or do like light pickup was like fuel for their fire. And so I'm not saying there's a perfect way to do it. I understand when there's a very high level and professionalism needed, but I do think in a lot of situations, it's just really stimulating to gamify things. And just looking at that dial, having that dial on your window, really important element of that training and training longevity equation, especially once you aren't going to be in range of some of those all-time PRs or many of them, and you have the game set before you, or even if the game is just reframing what is good now. I think that's also part of that game. We do frame up and perceive and play games with the way that we set up workouts, even in our mind, and frame those things. So whether it's chasing somebody, chasing an object, jumping for a task or a parkour type thing, or just reframing how you set up your goals, it's all part of that element of training that is really important. Something that goes along with gamification is just what you call a generalist mentality. And this is a lot of these points, I should say, are things that are very universal. the generalist mentality is kind of that long moving thing that you do want for life. Because again, at the end of the day, do we want to say, let's just take fitness, for example, basic fitness and how we consider fitness. If at the end of your life, your whole movement experience was, hey, I lifted weights and I did some conditioning on the treadmill or the cardio equipment, very common. What embodied things or lessons or richness did you get out of that? Well, there is a lot of richness in, again, getting, I think I mentioned it, getting a pump and feeling strong and feeling your heart going and doing conditioning. There is a important piece to that. But our bodies are meant to move and learn and learn different things. And as I've spent time, especially too, as Rafe Kelly's Return to the Source retreat, a lot of parkour and martial arts games and roughhousing games and all these things that I was not, as someone who's, I'll just say, pretty athletic, definitely not the most athletic person, but who has good rhythm and body control, and I enjoy movement. There were so many of those practices that I was really struggling. My learning curve was behind and I saw it. And especially some of the acrobatic stuff too. I was so impressed with people who did parkour and various tricking movements and breakdance iterations and new martial arts. And I really felt like, wow, I like to sprint and jump and do track and field events. And I just felt like I was missing not learning some of those things. And so that really impacted how I view the perpetual forward moving journey of learning skills and activities. And all this is to say, I'm still not like a tricking expert or anything like that. But it just really gave me an appreciation for learning and experiencing more things as you go through life. So I remember very shortly after that seminar, I got my neighbor's skateboard and instead of running, a lap around the block or the neighborhood to warm up for my session, I would skateboard around. I don't do that anymore. I did rollerblade too a little bit, but now it's more just an appreciation for that got me into and moved me forward towards, hey, in the winter, I'm going to do rock climbing for my main upper body strength activity. And that's going to give me another route. If we think of a tree and we think of the trunk, those basic power abilities and then the branches, wow, that's a really cool branch is the rock climbing branch. That's something that I'm going to pursue in the winter. And then even things like the learning process behind like breakdancing moves. And I'm not a break dancer, but I know some movements and moves and just doing some of the basic like freezes and ground-based moves. Even the stuff like if you are in strength and conditioning, you've probably seen like a breakdancer warm-up move, stuff like that, those basic iterations. So I'll take some of those and try to push them pretty far, like farther than you would ever need in strength and conditioning. But it makes me feel good because it makes me feel like I'm really, there's another branch of my tree. Wow, that skill chain. There's always something new to learn here and something to push towards here and something to level up it's not just a number or an output number, it's also an ability. And the cool thing is if you really improve a lot of those branches of the trees and abilities, I also find that you kind of get this very robust, just general core human strength that sits in the middle of all those things. And sometimes you get that without asking for it in some perspective. And I think that's a really valuable element of the human journey. So I know like Ido Portal and many others have talked about taking on that mentality of a generalist and not just being specific to one skill. And I do think for even longevity's sake, just pure longevity, human longevity, to not just do one thing. I think there's research on if you just do distance running or one endurance practice, and it's the same thing over and over and over again, it like shortens your telomeres or something. I don't know. I never like to be alarmist, but I do think that doing a variety of tasks is just beneficial to the human experience, leveling up skills and learning novelty. And then one thing as well, I had this written down was like flow rope. I remember I actually first saw flow rope. I was talking about Rafe Kelly's retreat, Return to the Source. That's where I first really saw the flow rope. I had seen those done. And honestly, I didn't get it. I might have played around with it and I didn't get it. And it's really been the last couple of years, or really the last year, I decided, okay, I want to learn this thing. I want to see what the deal is here. And I'll just say if nothing else, well, two things. I don't want to say if nothing else. But one thing is I've found that the flow rope, if we're talking about just general transfer to human skills and abilities, I find athletes who struggle to connect their arms to their legs and their rib cage to their leg motions. There's a lot there. you can use, even like teaching athletes bounding and some of the movements that get your arms moving back behind your body. There's really cool crossover pieces. And the rope you can train like forever. It's like zero impact almost. So you can do a lot of reps there that you wouldn't get doing a series of bounds. You only have so many bounds you can do. So it's something that can be a gap bridging tool. A lot of athletes are good enough with their movements, they wouldn't need it. But even more than that, the point I wanted to get at was it's novelty. It's like infinite novelty. There is always more tricks to learn. And on a training day or in a training life series, that dopamine hit of learning a new skill is always going to be there. And so for me, it's fun too, because I can't tell you how many times I hit myself in the face with a rope trying to do like an underhand sneak and being confused. And it's kind of good. It's not just kind of, I think it's really good for us as humans to try to do something, to be confused and figure out a movement puzzle. And then you get it and you feel good about it. And the more of those things you can solve with the rope or whatever it is, I think there's, I talked about this like robustness that sits at the center of all the branches of the tree that you can build or grow out. I also think there's like a problem solving center that sits there as well. And so I do think that is incredibly useful. And one just quick anecdote with that is with the rock climbing that I do in the winter. Some of the things I do a lot more now are breathing based, timing based activities. And I found a crossover in those things. So one is just, or where a lot of this started was just running. So breathing and timing steps to breath, for example, and using that to help with breath, both breathing capacity, a sense of timing in running, a sense of challenge that goes beyond just pace. So training the ventilation system as much or more than even the muscles and the energetics beyond running. But then that turned into, how can I infuse this into sprinting or jumping timings? And then, well, how does my breathing actually time up when I sprint? And where I'm going with this is just yesterday, actually, funny enough, was the first day back at the new rock climbing season for the year. And I'm climbing. And I just noticed this just emerges out of nowhere. And this is one of the best experiences to me in athletics, is when you get these things that just kind of emerge out of nowhere. I found my breath naturally timing and syncing to holds, to the rhythm of the climb itself. And I was just blown away by this. It's almost like it wasn't even me doing it. It was this skill, this thing, this habit that was stored doing other things, which was running and even like hopping, even some strength training, I should say, some ideas with strength training in there. Doing inhaling and exhaling in different timings with the up and down piece. And I forgot to mention, I've been working on even that too as well. And you're working on these things and all of a sudden you're doing another skill and you just feel it show up. And that is one of the coolest things that I believe happens in training, is when things you have worked on just show up and you get to be this observer. It's like, whoa, that is so cool. And honestly, it was the best first day of climbing I've had, honestly, since I can remember. The first day is always so rough with just grip and forearms and the feeling of the wall and rhythm on the wall. And it was the best first day I'd had. So just really learning those skills, you tend to stack and you get better at the process and the little interplay that happens and exists between all those things. The fifth key is to work with the seasons. And this is just a huge, huge piece. It's one that I've really only had on my radar, I want to say like the last 3-ish, maybe 4 years. It was a Christian Thibodeau podcast where he talked about a friend of his who was like in his mid-50s and jacked and strong, and he divided up his year into a series of training seasons. And it went something like, it was like bodybuilding in the fall, powerlifting in the winter, Olympic lifting in the spring, and track in the summer. And man, that just checks off so many boxes of what I just mentioned, the different practices. Yes, very strength and power oriented, but cycled, different skills, different abilities, different embodiments of the training process. And Sam Wiest, who I've also had on the podcast, talks about seasons in light of more Eastern philosophy and just the seasons of life and Chinese medicine as well. And just the different things our body is essentially wired to, or how we're wired to respond to different levels of sunlight, colder air, warmer air, heat and fire in the environment. And that has really inspired me to take on a strong seasonal approach in my own training. I also look at that very extensively when I'm taking on and working with clients and making sure that, look, we're not just hitting this 14-week push to get you to X. And yes, we want to do the best job we can within that scope. But, well, where do we want to be in 2 or 3 years? And how can we schedule a year so that you're going to be better next year and the year after? And every little season you get to, you think, or hopefully think, oh, I'm excited for this season versus how I used to do it. I'll amplify the error here. In my mid-30s, it was literally all speed and power all the time, all maximizing power in the weight room and plyometrics and sprinting. And there was never a break really from it. There was no seasonality. I will say living in California does make that a little bit different because there's a lot less. There's definitely seasons in Northern California without question, but it's a lot different than being here in the Midwest. And so I really hit like a massive, you could say burnout, but basically I was 36 and I'd been training essentially that no season, all speed power all the time mentality for a very long time. And I just remember one month, it was February of maybe 2017, somewhere in there, 2018. And all my lifts just went down. In the course of a month, all my lifts went down, I think main list 30 pounds. My jumping went way down. My sprinting got way worse. Everything just started to totally flatline. And you might say, oh, it's adrenal fatigue or it's nervous system burnout, whatever. I can just tell you I had no seasonality. I had no pacing or rhythm or anything. And so now the way where I look at it now, and I'll just talk about myself personally and then maybe a little bit about how I look at the average client long term for someone who's interested in speed, power, strength, and athletic ability as they move forward. So for me, my summer is my track season. That's where the highest expression of speed and power comes out. A lot of javelin throwing too, getting outside and throwing as well. So track and field disciplines and outcomes. And a lot of times less weightlifting, there is definitely a strength piece there for sure, but it's a little bit less, and I'll get to why. The spring building up to that outdoor season is a lot of more plyometric stuff and work, relatively speaking. I actually get in to this group called Springbox. So I have a lot of the online clients I work with who fit the mutual bucket. I have competitions for plyos like standing triple jumps, standing 5 jumps. And what you reward is a lot of times what you can work harder towards, and as well as just having higher plyometric volumes in the program. So the spring tends to be a little bit more plyometric prep type things. And you could think of plyos as just being a little bit slower pace, a little bit, still super explosive, but then like a max sprint you do in the hot summer heat. So a lot of times that's more the build-up phase. And then the winter for me it's strength, it's rock climbing, it's more sandbag carries up and down the driveway because honestly, if it's 25 degrees outside and there's snow on the ground, to go and try to think about getting a good sprint workout, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Some people can do it, and I'm totally impressed by that. And to take the Rocky into the sprint workouts, for me, it's a little bit more efficient in the winter in terms of my season and my, you could say track season being very much the summer, the time for that. It's more efficient to turn on the Rocky music and just go up and down the driveway with sandbags, and maybe every third's a fast sprint, fast shuffle type thing up. For me, that's a very efficient way to get that done. And then I do a little bit of sprinting, more hill sprinting in the winter. I have an 80-meter hill. I'll sprint up and down that. Again, it's slightly or relatively slower, but I feel like with the cold, a hill sprint just works because there's just something that's very primal and innate about that. I'll get to that in a future point here. But that's how I tend to work that. And then the fall, I've moved my fall a little bit. And since I've been doing more of the seasons, like I mentioned bodybuilding with Kristen's friend, for me, it's a little bit more conditioning oriented. So more like trail running. You could even think trail running with parkour type elements involved and conditioning pieces. Where I've gone a little more, and it was one of Rafe Kelly's videos that tuned me into this, is just a very play-based reflection of the summer. So I've infused a little bit of just more low-key. You drop out all the outputs and measurements, and you just play and explore with the things you were working on for that fiery season of the summer and just reflect that in a new light. And that doesn't necessarily fit, I think, with a typical track schedule, but it's been something I've been working with and enjoying. And just honestly, just having that late downtime, that period where you are not feeling pressed to hit outputs, you can really just get to enjoy things. An example of a workout I did recently or have been liking, and I've prescribed this as well, and I do like it, is, I mentioned doing things for time and output, and then just doing things for the fun and the task and the environment. I'll do a series of sprints in the fall when it's cold out too. It's like 30 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And the first two sprints are just for feel. The first one is just body awareness, just feeling the awareness, noticing breathing. The second one is playing around with some sort of air or air amplification, and no time for the first two. I don't time them. But then the third one, run, put it together, time it. And the crazy thing, I'll do cycles of that. So maybe it's 2 or 3 cycles of that for 150 meters or 200 meters. And the crazy thing is those ones you do time are really good. and the goal is that they're good, that you don't have to try hard, because again, it's the fall. This isn't the time to be pressing. And I've been enjoying playing around with distributions there of noticing and play and then efforts. And I feel like especially too, as you move forward in that athletic journey and path, it becomes even more helpful to dig into that and gain the training wisdom from it. I'm not saying like your high performing D1 college track 400 team. I think those types of athletes are often going to have success with the high pressure, high stimulation, just being in that team environment, pushing. There's so much richness there. But for me, and when I'm by myself and I want to learn more about the process and I want to have a period of downtime, not measuring some things, treating some items differently has been extremely valuable. Moving forward, seeking community and then gameplay within community. I'll keep this short because there's a few other elements that I want to, or probably will touch on more. But at the end of the day, there is that like archetype of the lone wolf in training. I resonate with that because that's been a lot of my training experience, and so many of my best thoughts and ideas have come from that. But also, our training environment is what makes us and forges us. And the best years of my athletic life, especially if I look at the most high output years of my 20s, it was when, yes, there was great training, but I also had really good training partners and a really good training environment. And so even now, I really am intentional. Like I will sacrifice even like ideal, I'll put air quotes, logistics in a training week to have a training partner. Or if I know there, for example, right now this isn't on my plate, but it has been in past years, if there's like an ultimate Frisbee game on the table in the week, I will move days around to be able to do that ultimate Frisbee and move on and have it sit well in my training week. It is so important to have games, community, people to train with, people to share time and space with even. I have a sauna in my backyard it's actually kind of a community project. Neighbors have contributed and worked on that it's a part of their system as well as mine. So we share the sauna together in that time, and that community as well as just the power of a sauna has been really important for my own, it's a physical experience because it's a lot of heat and there's aerobic stressor, but there's also that community and that recovery that comes with that. And obviously the critical and so important social dynamic. So as we go, just don't forget community, games, make time for it, shuffle things around for it. It is so important. The next point, and this is one that I could probably have really a whole podcast on. I feel bad that I'm going to downplay it a little bit in time, at least spending time on it, but it's your mythos. And it goes with the Rocky theme, and it's that training it's an adventure. It's not an obligation. It's not, I gotta get it in today. Gotta go to the gym today. And I think that's where, if it is like just hitting machines and cardio and that's it, like the typical kind of bulk fitness setup. Yeah, there's not a lot of adventure in that. It is an obligation. So the mythos is, how do you make your training an adventure? And there's a lot of ways to do it. So one of the things, and I have a list here. It's one of those things where I have so much material, I could really read off of this quite a bit. But you can think of the mythos. This is what I have written down. It's the feel in your training environment. It's the narrative or the story you place on yourself. It's the story you tell about yourself. It's the symbols and rituals in your training environment. So you could think the banners on the wall, or maybe it's pictures of athletes you've trained, or your own athletic experiences, or things that are important. Maybe it's family, or it's something that's important to you and that motivates you. And it's also the music. So the ritual of the music selection in your training. There's also, and this is something not often talked about, but I think it lives, that's innately in us that we maybe don't talk about, but it's there, is the emotional archetype that you inhabit. And for example, the warrior would be a very common emotional archetype. You can see people really wearing that in a lot of gyms, the way they walk around between sets, or even the way they might look at themselves in the mirror a little bit, and the general mannerisms. There's a warrior archetype that's coming out there. You could also have like an explorer, so someone who wants to explore and make connections, and you're using your body and the implements as a means to explore and understand your world. Art is very similar. How can I make this training an art form? How can I use the music and the exercises and the activities to make this almost feel like a piece of art or a song? Can it flow the way a song flows, with a steady buildup, this crescendo, this cool down, and not just, all right, hey, we're going to go in, we're going to hit a few like clamshells and scapular push-ups, and then hit our heavy squats and Olympic lifts, and then ride a bunch of auxiliaries. That song is kind of, you wouldn't want a song that kind of comes out really hard and then just kind of gets, settles into the low level beat the last 70%. So there's that artistry element as well. And then do I have any others? Yes. Oh yeah, monk. That was the last one. Monk, critical. So just think, hey, if I lit some candles and did iso lunges and push-ups in a dark room, something like that would be your purest monk archetype in training. So those long isometric holds. And I say this because we talk about like long isos almost only sometimes for just, well, what are the exact adaptations and how are we cycling through all the energy systems? And what's the muscular and tendon compliance that's happening here, and those types of things, or even like elements of willpower and psychology. And I think those are all really important. But at the end of the day, everything you do also gives you something that's almost like unspoken mentally and emotionally. And one of the ways that I really work with that in my own training, there's a few ways. I'll just share the things that have been beneficial for me. And I think as I've gone through even those listings, I'm sure there was things that you thought of that resonated with you. In fact, if you're listening to this on the podcast or YouTube and you want to leave a comment, I'd be really curious to hear those things that really different training tools really draw out of yourself in your own practice. For me, one of the things is just having a space, like a sacred space. Like for me, my garage has become that. And it's really transformed itself over time. And that's something, as I've grown older, I've taken more pride in, is that space you have. And for me, my emphasis on idea is more of a minimalist space. So versus having a vast swath of training tools, because I've been in facilities that have those and they're beautiful and amazing and they're a lot of fun too. But there's also something that's archetypically important about having almost nothing. Like I think about like Joe DeFranco, for people familiar with Joe, well known. Like he started with like a 500 square foot closet or something like that. And he talked about just the great results people were getting in that. And there's something that's very innate about that minimalism. You don't have much. Or even Daniel Coyle's work on like the Little Book of Talent or the Talent Code. And a lot of these talent dens, people come from like nothing, are very minimalist, very Spartan, this environment that says you haven't made it yet. And you have to, this isn't like all the glitz and glam and all the, the beautiful, huge training environment. I will say those are great to be in too, by the way. I've found you walk into like every time I go to like the U.S. Olympic Training Center, I haven't been there in a while, but I would go with Cal Men's Swim back in the day, my time at Cal. It's inspiring. You walk in there, even the Olympic, the different pictures and Olympians, and the place is beautiful. There's something that's awesome about that. So I'm not going to say don't train there. But at the same side, you could say again, maybe like a dial. On one side you have that, and on the other side you have this minimal, archaic. It says it's like Rocky in the Eye of the Tiger in this den. It's just minimalist. So for me, having a place that's my main things, it's sandbags, it's a few training machines. And I think there's just something about like a machine, the hammer strength squat machine I have. It was based out of, I think it's the same model that Husker Power in Nebraska football was using in the 80s. There's something that's kind of ancient about it, if the 80s is ancient. But I really appreciate that. And a few other items and training tools. But I like that minimalist feel because there's something about that I really enjoy. So there's that. I also like training seasonally. So basically meaning, hey, I'm going to go outside. Not every workout's inside. I enjoy indoor rock climbing for sure. But going outside, if it's cold out, even if it's 10 or 20 degrees, and doing a sandbag carry up and down the hill, that is within yourself. You just put on a bunch of sweatshirts and layers and get it done. Maybe there's a sauna at the end, which is always great. But it's something you can get done, and there's just something that's innate about that type of thing. Within the sandbag itself and weights, having a mythos, there's kind of like you use training sometimes to almost manufacture an enemy. We don't live in the same culture that we used to, but I've heard this in marketing. And of course, if you play in team sports, you see this in spades and rivalries. And I live in Ohio, and so I think there was they called it Hate Week, Ohio State and Michigan, and I think they crossed off all the M's in town. You correct me if I'm wrong, but these rivalries, I feel like in some ways they almost exist in modern life just so that we can have an enemy and experience the power of the tribe in light of having an enemy. I could probably go on there, but hopefully you understand what I mean. And even in marketing, successful marketing and viral marketing is, hey, this is the enemy. This thing is the enemy. Let's be on this side. People thrive innately on those things. And I think we have to obviously be very careful with how much we let that type of thing influence us. I think regardless of what exactly is going on in the external world, I do think in the internal or in the training space, safely have the enemy of the weights, to attack the weights, I think is powerful. And one of my favorite things in that mythos is a sandbag. And I've talked with Julian Pinot. He's been on this podcast, and he has said that the sandbag, it feels like a fight. Like you don't just pick up a sandbag, you fight with it, you grapple it, you wrestle it. And anyone who's trained with sandbags has felt that, especially heavy sandbags. And that's just the thing, is there's the kind of the lower level commercial, all right, here's some 20-pound and 30-pound sandbags, and we're going to do some twisting lunges. And then there's sandbags, 100, 150, 200 pounds. And you don't pick up a 150 plus pound sandbag without fighting with that thing. And there's a feel to it. I would say, and this is interesting too, I'll lump this in. I hadn't had it in my notes, but someone posted the activities and how much they boost testosterone. And funny enough, I think team sport, basketball was 10% plus. Running, distance long running was minus 20 or minus 30. Speaking of the telomere damage or just doing one repetitive thing, excessively. But wood shopping was plus 25%, or it was above the team sports. You actually get more of a testosterone boost playing or chopping wood than playing football. And so with the wood chopping or anything that's very in nature, innate, something that feels like a little bit of a fight or combat, those types of things, it's an important part of the mythos of that element, that warrior element of training. And so bottom line with that is just think about the story that your environment tells, or the place you're training, the equipment, the style, and the music, and even that story you can have about yourself. And even reframing, even if something is just running hills in the cold, you can think of it as, hey, I'm earning it on the hill today. This isn't just, all right, 6 by 80 meters. There can be a story behind yourself, nature, and the cold, or whatever it is, whatever the element is, whether it's hot, cold, the elements that be. There's certainly the deeper story and activities and archetypes that go into that mythos of training. And to cap this piece off, I've so many the coaches I've seen that really get this are the ones that have something that it almost goes beyond all the other training that is underneath it, because they can capture training. I've seen coaches frame training as a series of battles with a college group. And the buy-in being very, very substantial there, making that training come to life, modulating the music and the feel and the tribal feel or the competition that happens within the group. These are all things that are ultimately very important to the piece of training or the outcome of training. So in terms of longevity, having that story to keep training alive, where it's not that obligation, but it is an adventure. This is so much of what makes us human and helps just the strength and power and richness of that journey. Next point, and just wrapping this up, is point 8 is to have a reflective practice. So for a lot of people, that's journaling. For some people, it could just be playing your training session backwards or audio notes. I use audio notes a lot sometimes just because honestly, maybe I'm just too impatient or haven't worked on my patience enough to be a super steady journaler. But throughout many times in my life, like the best, or funny enough, the best track season I had in college, I had a training journal of everything in the fall that I did. And so often it's interesting. So in terms of just journaling as a practice, so many successful figures throughout history have had owners of journals. I looked at like Leonardo da Vinci's journals and those who he has inspired. And it's interesting, you see, or once you start to understand reflection and training logs and journaling your perception of training, your goals, your ambitions, and your response, you start to see trends. You see things like, and I feel like it may happen a little bit more with female athletes than male, but I've seen, for example, Caleb Dressel, who's the most successful or the best NCAA swimmer of all time. I mean, his short course marks are unbelievable. There was a little segment on him, a TV station or some media was doing a segment on him, and he was talking about his journaling and year over year. But then I'll see athletes like Nikola Olisluggers, who carries journals between jumps. You'll see Anna Hall, I've seen, and other heptathletes journaling their experiences. And some form of reflection, I feel, is important in that process. And I think it fits into longevity just because I think it's a practice that you carry and you refine and you improve on year over year. This isn't like a 10-week training program type thing. It's a thing you do for life to improve and reflect on your practice. Or I'll hear Dan John, for example, talk about his training logs, like going back to old training logs, going back to this time in training and being able to note and reflect on that from later in life. And in the digital age, I think it's easier to lose that pen on paper element. And so for me, that's something I have been improving in my own training is I have a yearly journal for every year. I journal training throughout the year. I find I do a great job journaling and then I get lost for a week or a month and then have to jump back occasionally. And that sporadic nature is something I am seeking to improve. But at the least, I take voice notes. I have action points that come off those notes. I use Otter AI a lot of times after a track practice that I'm coaching or my own training sessions. I'll pop notes in the audio recorder and then I can just get like the 3 action points if nothing else and then ruminate over those and actually put those to paper later on. And so, or just even if not paper, maybe it's a file on my computer, I'll do that as well. So not, unfortunately, digital a little bit, but the ultimate thing I'm trying to get at is that even more than just like goal setting, a lot of times I've seen goal setting in a team environment and people will say, oh, I'm going to sprint this fast or jump this high or lift this much. And it's such a one-off little thing that you haven't thought about. Like you could tell a lot of people haven't thought about their goals that much and they want to say something that impresses other people or themselves. But what's really the home base is that daily reflective practice. If not on paper, if at least some sort of reflective practice. And one of the things I incorporated last year with track practices was just like a 2-minute, very basic reflective paper the athletes would fill out before they left. I made it really short on purpose, really easy. People could write more if they wanted, but I always make sure that I read everyone's reflection and I can come back to those or I can mention that to them in a future practice so they know I read it and I'm reflecting on it. And then that helps that total process of the group. I felt it was very valuable. So if nothing else too, just to have some point where we're all putting thoughts on paper. I think I was probably projecting even a little bit because sometimes I'm not as good with my own training journal as I hope to be. So it's all a forward journey. I'm not perfect in all these, but it is one I know is important. I've had it and used it throughout points in my career. I still use it regularly. Now is the most consistent I've ever been with journaling training items. And so it's something I'm working on, but I do know is an important piece of mastery in that process. Similar to journaling and reflection, one of the last points here, just honing your inner and visualization capacities, honing your mental capacities over time. This can happen in a few ways. I think one is learning to, the most, I think you could say just standard as you go through life and its challenges is just learning to handle adversity and deal with difficulty. Using training as a lesson for that, for example, how do you handle a failure, be it okay, it's a speed and power throw effort that you just missed the mark on. It wasn't good. It wasn't a good effort. It wasn't a good workout. How do you reflect on that? Do you use a judgmental or critical eye, or do you use an eye that can learn from, well, why did this workout go the way it did? What could I have done better? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. But understanding or being able to work through bad workouts is a skill over time. And when we're young, when I was young, I was terrible at having a bad high jump workout, for example. It was, I wouldn't say devastating, but it definitely ruined my day. And so learning to deal with things and learn from them has been really valuable. But also, in addition to speed and power, and I think I may have touched on this, but also fatigue. Richard Eschavis, who's very into the mind-body interface of training, and he's been on this podcast, has talked about doing like a set to failure or something that's very hard that you will eventually fail. You could also look at like an isometric. And instead of just, all right, wait, we're going to take this to failure and get everything out of it, he talks about asking, well, why did you fail? Why did you quit? And starting that mental process with that. And, conditioning and fatigue and tiredness, there's mixed opinions on how much of this we should have in different programs, and especially for like a track sprinter versus a football team versus a soccer team or anything like that. I do believe in a level of conditioning and fitness and needed and contextual difficulty in workouts. But I do think that if you just are throwing people against the wall and just doing fatiguing work and failing work and conditioning for the sake of doing it and making people, in air quotes, tough, I don't think that's on its own very effective, just because to make people what you would say tough. I think toughness is context driven. It's situational driven. But if you can do something that's very challenging and you can prompt inner reflection through it, I do think there's a lot more benefit in that. I really like Richard's idea there, and learning from his work, and as I've taken tough sets to high levels, I do start to, it changes where my mind goes in the course of those activities. And so I do think that we can improve our mental strength in those capacities as we go through our athletic journey, as well as our ability to visualize. And it's interesting, I talked about the tree of skills. So we have these branches, and I do this skill and that skill, and it enhances my longevity equation. But I also think the skill of using your mind in different ways, visualizing your workout in different ways, putting different analogies. For example, just simply put, let's say you're sprinting, maybe you visualize a rocket pushing you or a string pulling you, or one that I've played with this past year is balloons attached to you that are also pulling you up and forward if you want to play around with the modulation of the vertical lift and forward propulsion, things like that. So the ability to visualize and get more out of your body through this, the course of visualization and those skills, I think, is very important over the course of time. So all that being said, it's not just physical skills and capacities. We should be growing and learning in our mental abilities, and that journaling and reflective piece is also a gateway. It's like a hand in hand. A lot of these ideas and methods really work in pairs. Finally, and this is truly like the longevity thing. So I mentioned a lot of these things. These are very universally applicable ideas. But the last one is to simply stay young at heart, or be around those who are. So having younger training partners, if you want to be fast and you can sprint with younger, faster athletes, that's awesome. Playing sports with younger, faster individuals, learning to laugh at yourself, having a joyful outlook and approach to life. As I've seen athletes who are, for example, masters track, who are just absolutely killing it, they're young at heart. Like, they have this lightness to their spirit. There's really something to that. And so to cap it all off, that lightness, to not take yourself so seriously. I took myself so seriously when I was younger. High jump practices, like I mentioned, that didn't go well, anything like that. It was so part of my identity fused into it that I couldn't find the learning or at least a little laughter through it. Whereas now that is much, much easier, and it actually makes for better training. It actually makes for better results. And it also makes for that joy. If you want to think of the branches on that tree as the joy in the process, not just, hey, I did these outputs, which is awesome. There's joy in that. But hey, I really genuinely enjoyed that process of learning. I enjoyed the people I was able to work with along the way. And so that's 10 points there. This caps off this solo podcast. And just to kind of summarize things real quick, to bring it home, synthesizing some elements, make training your art, stack skills over time, and learn to live in the moment in what you do. Train seasonally. As you move forward, it's going to become more and more important, and appreciate the seasons and the weather and the climate of where you're at, and use that to fuel your fire. Use it to fuel your mythos and to feel those innate pieces of who you are. Gamify training where you can. It's a dial, so always respect the dial of gamifying things, be it in the warm up or if there's parts of the main training session where it's applicable. Just to learn to, when you just have straight sets and outputs, and then where games are appropriate to place in there, be mindful of that and how that also might change from year over year based on the season of your life as well as the season of the year. Build community, respect the tribe, respect your environment, and understand that your results are not just the single exercise in front of you in the set and rep scheme. It comes from where you train, your mind, those around you. And finally, grow your mind, grow your reflection, and grow your wisdom over time. I'm 42, and these are still things that I am working on. This is not coming from I've mastered all these, and no. I'm working on it myself, but these are things that I've picked up along the way. Finally, if you are interested in training in a way that incorporates these, whether you're a younger athlete or an older one, I do online training. My list right now is pretty darn close to capacity, but if you want to head to justflysports.com, there's a online training application getting on the list there. You can check that out. I enjoy working with athletes of all types, and this journey has been awesome for both myself and then the privilege of being able to be a coach to others as well. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.